All right.
Hello and welcome. I'm Manish Anand. The Raisina Hills brings you a very special episode with a very special guest, the former Foreign Secretary Shashank. And we have an issue that the United Nations body on the human rights took up a motion for debate on the human rights violation of the Uyghur Muslim minority in the Xinjiang province in China, but India abstained and China narrowly escaped the international scrutiny with only 19 votes against the motion, while 17 votes, including the US, the UK, France, Japan, and South Korea, voting for the debate. Now that India abstained, India has maintained that it is a long-standing position that the internal matter of a country need not be discussed at a multilateral forum. Ambassador Shashank, first and foremost, we still have this Nehruvian detachment in our international policy.
Well, I think quite right. We can say that it is also a legacy of the Indian foreign policy that we take a defensive position in the sense that we don't want international scrutiny of national governments' domestic concerns, domestic policies. In our case, for example, we are a very firm democracy, but many foreign countries don't have a very clear-cut idea about India, and they go on the basis of their own alignments with different blocs. So if some blocs are not very happy with India, then they would suggest that India is not a very clear-cut democracy. Some people's rights are being harmed there. And so we must go into and look into India's domestic concerns. This has been seen from time to time, not only on the social side, but also on the economic side or human rights side, that countries try to carry out this kind of an international discussion about other countries. Now, it is not a very objective approach, equitable approach that every country has to be open to this kind of a scrutiny. Many countries escape this scrutiny. They are never brought before it. On the other hand, some countries are repeatedly brought before the UN Council on Human Rights. And we have seen in so many times that India is asked to take up a position which is supposed to be much more open for a scrutiny and much higher standards of human rights and social equitability than what is expected of other countries. So I think India has had this position. So partly it is a legacy and partly it is India feels that the system has not yet become equitable and objective enough that these things can take place. I mean, first example, if we take the question of the UN institutions themselves, starting from the Security Council, it reflects only the realities of the 1945 end of World War. And in 44, when they had set it up, they were the victors and the losing nations. And even though India had helped very much the cause of the what they call the liberal world, of course, India was a part of the British Empire at that time. But many countries felt that India should have been a member of the UN Security Council and permanent member. And initially, it was conveyed to India that very soon there would be a change in the composition of the Security Council. India would definitely be taken into the Security Council because by all accounts, India deserved it. But lo and behold, more than 75 years are over and still we are where we were. I mean, there are people are still saying whether India really deserves to be there. Yes, India has done several good things, but there are several bad things also. So therefore, to consider that UN institutions are somehow have to supervise the work of the national governments, irrespective of the constitutional provisions given in various national governments for protection of human rights, for social rights, for equal economic rights of their people. So we feel that it is not the right thing to do. And whether it's China, whether it is Sri Lanka, whether it is India, whether it's Cuba or any country, India has consistently taken that approach. So you can say that, well, till the wrongs of the UN institutions are set right, India will find it very difficult, irrespective of whether it is considered a legacy or whether it's considered that India wants to find a rightful place in the Committee of Nations as a country which has done much more for its own people and for people in the region and outside. So I think that issue will remain. And India does not think that just a mere discussion on China in this council would help very much making China a more democratic country or more answerable to the standards set by the international institutions. It will not happen. For example, if you see that most of the Muslim countries, except for Somalia, they all abstained or voted against. So they are not interested in any of these issues being raised in the UN councils. So let us first ask them, I mean, whether before they ask India for various reasons to take up this issue on China, to embarrass China, but what about those countries which have been always talking about the rights of different religious groups?
Indeed. That is definitely evident that the United Nations itself is losing much of the relevance, given that its principal mandate to maintain peace in the world is hardly being seen. But if we look at the votes which went into the favor, then we see a clear divide happening. That the developed world, basically the Western countries and Japan and South Korea in Asia, they are aligning on one side, and the developing countries like India, they are saying it's none of our business. So, do you think that China increasingly is getting isolated on the global stage?
India should not mind if China is getting isolated on the global stage. That is one issue which should have been done long time ago. And we have seen that Americans were one of the few developed countries which gave all kinds of technological support to China. And even Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, they had helped China very much get all the technology companies to get integrated with the global economy. And whatever may have been the issues, point remains that America thought that China will become a democratic country simply by giving them technology and money and investments and bringing them into WTO and the various Asian or regional trading arrangements. It has not happened. So therefore, I think we have to see that where the world is going. Immediately after the end of the Cold War, we saw that NATO should have been disbanded, other organizations, military organizations should have been disbanded. But what happened? NATO started out-of-area operations. They wanted to set up democratic regime in Afghanistan. They wanted to change the setups in many Central Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries. What it led only to military conflict, a lot of bloodshed, millions of lives lost. And I do not know how far it helps if China puts a million people of Uyghur under some kind of control. And on the other hand, the Americans and the NATO countries go and millions of people in other countries. And then they say, well, all right, let us discuss the human rights of the people. So where is the humanitarianism in these issues? In Switzerland, we have this organization led by Red Crescent and Red Cross, and they have the international humanitarian law on which conferences are held from time to time. Platitudes are announced so that at least during wartime, certain minimum responsibilities have to be taken into account. If you look at the Indian scenario, in the old days, India had the system of Dharma Yudh, that even if there's a war, then by the evening, the conflict will end, the wounded and other casualties would be taken care of by the respective sides. Even sometimes the doctors and the medical people would move to the other side to help these people. So that is humanitarianism. Here we are not thinking of any humanitarianism. This is really saying isolate a country as far as possible, but don't isolate it induct it into your system if you think that you can carry out and continue controlling the whole world. And I think our foreign minister said that recently very clearly, that Europe particularly thinks that if they are European problems, then they are the world's problems. But problems in Asia or India or other places, they are their problems. And in fact, they should abide by the highest standards which have been laid down by the civilized countries of Europe to be followed by the countries in the world. So I think these are the issues which we have to keep in mind. I'm not saying that India should not help improve the life, the humanitarian thing in China, but for that we can carry out a dialogue with the Chinese people, and we should tell them, and along with the other Asian countries, that China needs to improve its behavior. It has been found wanting in many counts for people within China, and also among various neighboring countries. They have been doing a lot of muscle flexing and creating problems for them.
Indeed. In fact, Ambassador Shashank, Global Times has run an editorial lauding India's stand on this motion of debate. But we have seen that ever since the People's Liberation Army came to Eastern Ladakh in 2020, India and the China relations have been frosty. Rather, we have no contact at the higher level between the two countries, barring Wang Yi's New Delhi visit as part of his Asian tour. So definitely India shouldn't become the Western front against China, but our relations aren't good at all.
Well, you are quite right. Our relations are frosty at the moment. But at the border areas, whatever normal channels of communication and engagement we have set up, they are still going on, and we should allow them to continue. At higher levels, in the regional, interregional groupings, we continue to meet, and we have to continue to meet even at the highest level. I feel that since we are both members of various international organizations and groupings, and we are soon going to have next year the SCO summit, the G20 summit in India, and therefore it is very important that we try to bring in as far as possible all the member countries into the dialogue process and see how best we can improve the relationship bilaterally with China. And at the same time, we see that Chinese do not think that, well, whatever pressure they have been putting on the smaller countries of Asia, gradually they can increase that pressure on India also. So we have to set up certain kind of minimum requirements for China. I mean, for example, Chinese always say that, all right, one China policy. India has nothing against that, but India would very much like China also to follow and respect the one India policy. How are they sending their engineers and soldiers and others under the CPEC plan into POK? After all, earlier position of China was that it was a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. And as and when they came to some solution, China would abide by and would discuss the final thing with the side, whatever final arrangements were reached between India and Pakistan. But the arrangements as far as India is concerned are dealing with POK, including Saksham Valley, which has been handed over gratuitously by Pakistan to China. So now we are finding that Chinese have forgotten about all their earlier commitments, and they feel that, well, under the BRI, they have to set up a new infrastructure connectivity starting from China, the same way as Americans had done that through Marshall Plan after Second World War. China feels that after the Cold War is over, and after the Chinese had helped the West very much in all kinds of arrangements vis-a-vis Soviet Union, they feel that, well, now is the time for China to gradually become the number one power in the world. So I think they have to respect the position of India. Once they respect that, I think other things will fall in place. There should be no difficulty in going back to our own bilateral dialogue and other talks with the Chinese leadership.
True. Mr. Shashank, if we look at China more closely, then Xi Jinping moved out of China only for the first time when he attended the Samarkand summit for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization since the outbreak of the pandemic. And this month, they are going to have a very important meeting in China of their political party. And much outcome is awaited, and there could be consequences afterwards also vis-a-vis India and Taiwan as far as expansionism of China is concerned. Do you think that after October we need to worry about China's behavior?
I have a feeling that within China, this debate which will be going on in the Communist Party for the selecting their leader, I think they must make sure this will be a test for all of us to see whether Chinese are able to persuade their leadership to have a more responsible behavior uh, with regard to their own people and with regard to developing relations with the Asian countries. I think that is very important because it is true that Chinese leaders moved to Samarkand, but I think they were afraid that otherwise in SCO they might lose out, and there might be a feeling that China is no longer a country to be taken care of completely. I think, therefore,
Okay, very warm welcome. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Shashank. We are joined by the former editor of the New Indian Express, Mr. Kogen Singh. A very warm welcome, Mr. Kogen Singh, to our discussion. Can you hear
Thank
us?
you.
welcome, Govind Singh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Singh, if you want to ask anything to Mr. Shashank, or if you want to say something on China, you may. Please go ahead.
No, since I've just joined this thing, can you continue?
Of
I'll
course.
just listen.
Yeah, Mr. Shashank, you can carry on.
Yes, so we were discussing about the Chinese Communist Party meeting where the issue would be whether they would like to have the Xi Jinping again elected as the leader. And as it seems, despite all the uh, news coming out in the international media, it seems that he's very much in command of the party, of the uh, apparatus, and he's likely to be re-elected. Only thing is that whatever debates have taken place inside and outside China, we hope that that will make the leader Xi Jinping to behave more in tune with the ambitions, aspirations, whatever he calls dreams of the Chinese people. And secondly, a more responsible behavior towards the other Asian countries, particularly, and other the world. That is what India would be expecting of it under this new leadership, where Xi Jinping is becoming as important as Mao Zedong in the Chinese hierarchy.
Indeed. Mr. Singh, you have been very closely following the international developments. Uh, we have seen that the world is divided into two very stark camps. Russia and its allies on the one side, and the Americans and the NATO countries on the other side. And the foreign minister, as Jaishankar, has argued India's position at the multilateral forum very eloquently that we have our national interests to protect and we are not camp followers. Do you think that India has managed its response so far correctly, or there is any lack on that front?
Can't say that for certain, but actually, in fact, I would like to know more from Mr. Shashank if how is India handling this Ukraine crisis? Are you satisfied with the way the Indians have been sort of responding to Ukraine when we announced the annexation of these four regions? At the UN Security Council, India abstained from the voting, which sort of denounced
Mr. Singh, your voice is not very clear to me, so would you kindly come closer to the phone? Or
I was asking, are you satisfied with India's response to the Ukraine developments? How when Russia announced that they are annexing those four regions of Ukraine, and India abstained at the UN Security Council abstained from voting. Are you satisfied with India's stand on that?
Okay, what I gather, Mr. Shashank, that Mr. Singh is wanting to ask, are you satisfied with India's stand on Ukraine war, that India abstained on a number of occasions at the United Nations Security Council also on the Ukraine issue? Do you think India is justified in whatever position it has taken on the Ukraine war?
Well, there's no issue at all. I mean, India had to do whatever it has done and has followed the consistent policy, which is very important because we want peace in Europe, in Ukraine. And the only way to bring about peace was to start dialogue, start negotiations. What we are seeing is that consistently effort had been made, some kind of verbal commitments were made, but of course no treaty arrangement, that Russia's territorial integrity will be kept in mind, its security concerns will be kept in mind by the NATO countries, and they would not develop NATO's reach very close to Russia. That was the kind of understanding. Of course, now the Americans are saying that there was no such agreement with the Russians, and they have also been violating the Ukrainian sovereignty continuously. So therefore, this is an issue between Europe and Russia, where NATO has also got involved. I do not know whether it will help very much if other countries of the world, Asian countries and African countries, Latin American countries also got involved into this act, simply because the European countries tell us that, well, all right, this is a European problem, so this is a problem for the whole liberal world and democratic world, and we must all unite. These were the same kind of formulas which were used at the time of the Second World War when we were a colony. So I think in India and many other countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, immediately the feeling comes up that the West is taking them in the same way as if they were still their colonies, and they have to follow the whatever pretensions of democracy and liberal regimes in many of these countries. Whereas we have seen that there are many racist governments and feelings among many of these West European countries. Indians have suffered. Particularly the Hindus have suffered in many of these countries with violence and racist violence. So therefore, we find that these are really issues for Europe to decide. India can only hope that there would be peace and peaceful dialogue among these countries. The second issue, of course, we have to keep in mind, we were discussing China, that America has spoken on a few occasions of a G2 global regime to bring about peace and stability in the world, which should be led by USA and China. Now, where does that leave any scope for India? India is too close to China. We have to see that how Chinese have been acting with the other neighboring Asian countries, and even with India, we have seen their behavior. We would not like, we depend almost up to 60 to 65% on our armament on Russia. We would not like Russia to fall totally into the Chinese camp and thereby lose the ability to protect our security interests. So that is very important, that we cannot completely cut off, as the Americans and the NATO countries are asking us, that you stop all relations with the Russians and vote against them. Where does that leave us in many of these issues? And finally, as we have seen, that the West came into Afghanistan, left about $80 billion worth of weapons there, which have become available to the Afghan leadership. And if the Afghan leadership, for the time being, they're having differences with Pakistan, but they were not to have differences because Pakistan had helped them very much. So what happens? Then all those weapons would be available to Pakistan. So you will have a two-front, very clear-cut, opposed to India. And the Europe would say, well, you vote against Russia. So I think, therefore, whatever India has done in its interest of its own people. So I agree, Mr. Singh, that whatever India's approach is there, it's a different matter that our foreign minister has spoken very candidly, very frankly, about the double speak on the part of the other countries. I think perhaps that should be left to scholars and the think tanks. Foreign minister has to deal with the issues of very, very important issues of foreign policy formulation and making sure that international peace remains, because we have to allow a possibility of face-saving formula for all the countries who would like to go towards peace. Many countries in Europe right now, we find, are thinking in terms of going for a peace-seeking formula and not just continuing the war. So perhaps we should join that kind of a new equation there. I think that might help more.
Sure, Mr. Singh, you want to ask anything more, or you have anything
No.
to say?
This I would want to know from Mr. Shashank. IMF has come out, today it was reported in some of the papers. IMF has come out that globally, global recession is on the cards. Is especially worried about slowdown in China. So, if Mr. Shashank can throw some light on that, how does, because of the Ukraine crisis, how does, Mr. Shashank see this bleak economic outlook that the IMF has painted?
Ever since the beginning of this millennium, we have been seeing the trend of globalization. And Chinese were integrated into the global system by making them members of the WTO, giving them all kinds of technical and investment support. Suddenly, COVID came. And we have not been able to find out where the COVID started and how it started. But by and large, it is felt that it is a laboratory made virus and not a transition from animal life to human life. Therefore, doubts remain. Chinese have followed a zero COVID policy, and that has affected all the supply chain relationships coming out of China. I think, fortunately for India, India was not that much integrated for whatever reasons. We, whether China or whether because our companies, our industries were not thinking that they were competitive enough to get integrated into the regional and global supply chains, whereby our markets would be open to others, but we would not be able to get access to other countries' markets or professional movement of our people. That is our strength. So therefore, India has not been affected that much. It has been affected, no doubt, but still much less than those countries which were totally integrated into the supply chains at the regional or global levels. It will impact very much once it is felt that next year would be the real period of recession for Europe, unless some solution comes out before that. America may not be affected immediately because I think they are able to sell weapons and also supply all kinds of equipment to Europe. But I think, how long will Europe continue to pay for these weapons? At some stage, they will say, well, enough is enough. Our people are now asking us to stop the war, otherwise the European leaders would lose their positions. And the oppositions will come into power at that time. In France, we see that Marine Le Pen, at the time of the last elections, had already mentioned in her public speeches that she would withdraw from NATO in case she becomes the leader. So I think that is a public support. I do not know to what extent the democratic principles are followed in European countries or not, because there are all kinds of feelings, that there are these refugees who have come from the Middle East. They're bringing about a different feeling of conservatism in Europe. And secondly, Europe feels that, well, they are all together. NATO is the only protective arm for them. At the same time, the gas supply, which they had built up over so many decades. Merkel particularly worked on behalf of Germany to set up Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. They are finished. Nord Stream 1, in fact, has been destroyed through some kind of sabotage. So I think, these are going to have an impact gradually, perhaps in not 2023, maybe 2024, America will also get impacted. How long can India keep out of all this? So we will be affected immediately of feeling the pinch on the rupee-dollar parity. Can we work out some rupee trading arrangements, exchange arrangements with other banks in other countries? I do not know. I think it will be a difficult issue. Government of India has to work very hard on it. Wherever we can keep the rupee-dollar linkages, good. Wherever we find that we need to have direct supply chains with those countries, which can give us gas supply, oil supply, we should go ahead with that. Fertilizers are very important because our basic thing remains that last 2 years we have supplied free food to almost 800 million people in India. And how long can the government continue to supply that?
True.
So I think these things are very important for India, but the world is definitely facing a very dangerous situation. We have been able to keep ourselves insulated. We have blocked the export of sugar, rice, wheat, and that has helped the stability of prices within the country. But that's a temporary expedient. How long can we continue to keep those controls?
Indeed. The problem is that who will talk to Putin? Mr. Modi spoke to Vladimir Putin that this era is not of war. Turkish president also apparently spoke to him about peace. And yesterday the president of the United Arab Emirates went there. But the Russian foreign minister said that the West is not interested in ending the war. So it appears that nobody is serious about ending the war, neither the West nor the Russians.
Well, okay. My assessment is that let us wait till the November midterm elections in USA, and then hopefully a different approach will be taken. And in the meantime, Russian assets over the extended Russian territory will not be destroyed, that they are obliged to take very strong retaliatory action, which will keep on taking the conflict to a higher level. I think nobody wants to see the conflict going up to higher levels. But we remember the Iran-Iraq war, where every time a country felt that, well, they were winning, so they would increase the violence level. After some time, they will not achieve anything. So I think this is something becoming a very long drawn-out war of attrition. And Europe will not benefit from it. Russia will not benefit from it. Ukraine will be the least benefiting out of this whole conflict. But let us wait. I think there is a domestic scenario also, because the Democrats perhaps feel that unless they prove strong enough to deal with all kinds of adversaries, and there was a feeling, and Trump had gone about it very strongly, saying that they withdrew from Afghanistan, leaving all the American bases and weaponry without protecting them. And so therefore, there is a domestic angle which we cannot neglect in our debate.
Correct. Mr. Singh, you have anything to say?
There is a section
even in the West, especially in the media, that the Western countries may soon tire out, tire from supporting Ukraine. Right now, they're, providing them funds, they're providing them weapons, but a prolonged war where, the West is, a prolonged war may not suit the West, because West, after all, is also will run out of funds. They are already facing, the inflation, recession is huge, large. So the West may soon also cut off arms supply and also funding. So do you think that is a possibility?
Yeah, I think it's a possibility, but it's not visible right now. So therefore, I feel that maybe after a few weeks, we'll have a slightly different approach. And my only hope is that in the meantime, there should not be reckless talk of more dangerous weaponry being used. People have been talking recklessly of tactical nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, all kinds of things, all other warfare to be started. I hope that does not take place, because we have to live on this earth together. Europeans have to live on Europe together. They may have made some miscalculations. Okay, so they were responsible for setting up the First World War and Second World War. Hopefully, when the colonies are no longer existing and they can carry out this war in different parts of the world, I hope that they will now see that it is limited to the extent possible, and that countries can put pressure and request their friends that, all right, please come down on the conference table and come to an agreement.
So on that hope of note, we will wind up our discussion today. Ambassador Shashank gave a lot of insight on the prevailing situation in the world right now, which we find missing in the mainstream media. And Mr. Singh also joined us, a very special guest. Thank you, both of you, for joining the Raisina Hills for this interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.